we have heard Alessi cross multiple witnesses, and we heard him make his argument about why this is such a big deal. He said these seconds are incredibly important. So at the very least, there should be a section on cross like this, where Alessi says, you gave us a report on this date, and let's go through that report. And I would lock that man in on his report, his original report that had the 1231 and change time. So at the time, 1231 and change is when you said the impact happened. So you had this evidence, you had that evidence, you had the phone downloads, you knew what all these people were going to testify to, you had Whiffin's reports, and this was your conclusion. And let him quibble and wiggle all he wants. But you say, we are looking at this date in this report. I'll let you talk about what your second report or fifth report, whatever it ends up being. We'll talk about that in a second. We will get there, sir. But I want to talk about your report dated, whatever date it was originally. So the whole way, you were hired in October, and this trial started on April 22nd, and your expert opinion and conclusion was 1231 and change. And that was your conclusion when I crossed and my team crossed witness after witness. Isn't that correct? In fact, Mr. Whiffin, who was a big part of what you did in your report, the underlying data he pulled. And by the way, if you remember, Mr. Whiffin said, you can't just pull the data. You have to have somebody analyze it and tell you what it actually says. And that's what he did, right? And you relied on that. And I cross-examined Ian Whiffin on April 28th, I think. On April 28th, he'll have the exact date. And you realized when Whiffin was on the stand, you're wrong, right? You have the wrong time in your report, 1231 and some change. But you didn't change it then. You didn't send over a report on April 28th, did you? Then when Mr. Jackson crossed Jen McCabe about lots of stuff that you want to come here and say, this data is good, this one's not, here's the time, whatever it is, how it lines up in your timeline. She was on the stand, April 30th to May 2nd for a couple days. And at that time, April 30th through May 2nd, your opinion, your conclusion was 1231 and some change, right? And you didn't change your report on that day. You didn't turn it in on that day. Then Jessica Hyde was on the stand and she was cross-examined on May 7th. Another tech expert, whatever, went through some of the similar stuff with Ian Whiffin. And Yuri Buchanan, the person the Commonwealth wants to basically say is the lead detective on this case, the lead investigator on this case, he started testifying on May 8th. That's when you decided to produce a new report and change. You would agree it's a material change, right? He has to agree. The time of this collision, incident, death, whatever you want to call it, phone stops forever. That's important, right? That's important to the accident reconstruction, right? That's important with the Lexus data, the cell phone data, the health data, the testimony of the witnesses. And after all these people testified, after cross-examination of all these witnesses proved that you were wrong at 1231, you decided to change the time to 1232 and some change, which is what I've been saying in all of my questions is the true time. Isn't that correct? You realized, and if he says, no, I didn't listen to that witness, or no, I didn't hear that cross-examination, or no, I that's not why I changed it. I had this other reason to change it. You still present the timeline because the timeline can't be broken. Bev won't let this in. I think she just indicated she will let it in. And if she doesn't let it in, that's a huge appellate issue. You have to let in this entire timeline. Let them object. Let them object all they want to. I don't even care. How do you look like a reliable witness during that cross? It just so happened the day after Jessica Hyde and the day Buchanan gets on the stand and starts testifying about all this stuff, you give a new report. And guess what? That report wasn't even turned over to us until May 11th, 3 days after or 4 days after Buchanan is on the stand, starting on the stand. Weeks after Whiffin got cross-examined. Weeks after I basically proved through these witnesses that you were wrong. Now that's argumentative, but I think she's going to give him some leeway and be like, Judge, I need to prove the timeline of when this guy changed his time to the jury so they fully understand what's happened here. I would put, and if she didn't let me do it, I would ask her to send the jury out and let me proffer the cross-examination I think is necessary to prove just how bad this is. I would make it as broad and brutal as I possibly can. This would be a huge chunk of my cross. It may be the beginning of my cross if I'm Alessi. Then you go into everything you plan to cross-examine him on anyways, because you realize Mr. Alessi, very prepared. He's already got a cross prepared for this guy. He's already worked with ARCA to cross this guy. But this is all brand new. So I would probably start with it personally. And I think that should be a huge part of the cross-examination. And I would say you changed your report on May 11th because you knew you were wrong based on how the evidence came out in this trial. Isn't that right? Because you already had all this underlying information. You already had all these details. And you got it wrong until somebody had to tell you. Oof. I mean, that's brutal. To me, that's almost better cross than he was going to get.